So the Mt Logan Expedition was a group of people from North Shore Rescue going to climb the highest mountain in Canada. And I was a member in training at the time, the youngest as part of that group, the newest member. And we went kind of expedition style to set up a base camp and then move to a higher camp and move to a higher camp. We planned to spend about 3 weeks on the mountain. And so what ended up happening is a subgroup decided to try a second day to get onto the summit while others were moving back down the mountain. So we kind of got spread across the mountain. And then on the way down, the storm hit and stranded us all on the mountain at various different locations. Storm lasted a couple of days. It was a really vicious one, actually. And unfortunately, Don, Alex, and Eric got stuck up high. Gord and Linda were also high, but not in trouble, but they were hunkered down for the storm. But those three guys, they really got themselves into trouble. They were in a very exposed piece of the mountain.
Well, we got onto a knife ridge and we were at the worst possible place. And we knew storms were coming because we had the sat phone and we had the weather report for the next day. So we get up there and we can see the storm clouds are about 400 miles away. We figure we got 4 hours to get to our next safe camp. And that storm hit us within 15 minutes. It was so powerful we couldn't move. We couldn't even crawl.
The weather started turning really, really bad very, very quickly. So you get to the point where you can't see past the tips of your skis, really, right? And you know, you can't go this way or this way, and you just sort of have to shelter in place, so to speak. So we ended up having to hunker down, which we did, and the winds came up, and even though the tent was anchored down, it started buffeting a lot, and to the point where the one or two of the anchors would rip, and it would sort of flip the tent over, and you would have to crawl in to keep it down. And the winds would come up one night, and it's almost like a train. And then it would stop, and then it would buff it up again. And so it was very cyclical.
And I was going to stay in the tent and melt some snow so we had something to drink, because when you're at altitude, and we're at 18,500 feet, you need extra fluids. So I was in the tent, I took my big gloves off to light the stove, just as a rogue gust of wind came, grabbed the tent, ripped it from the anchors, and now I was up in the air. And luckily the tent door was open because Alex was just getting out of the tent, so I was able to dump all the stuff out, which me being all the stuff. So I ended up being dumped out of the tent, 18,500 feet with no gloves. So I froze my hands probably within about 4 or 5 minutes, where I was completely useless. So if it wasn't for Don and Alex coming back and basically taking care of me, I would have died up there without question.
It was sort of in Prospector's Call on Logan there that the tent eventually got airborne once the anchor straps ripped away, and the tent was gone. So, and then I said, well, we're going to have to basically dig a snow cave. And so there was the three of us.
Well, you wear 5 sets of gloves on when you climb up to high altitude. And you wear the 2 lower or inner gloves, and then you wear the big mitts over top. And you have a big set of fleece mitts and then Gore-Tex mitts. And I took the mitts off to light the stove, but I kept the gloves on. So I still had 2 sets of gloves on, but it's just not appropriate for that kind of cold. So even with the gloves on, my hands were completely useless in less than 3 or 4 minutes. Well, it was so cold before the storm, when you spit, it would freeze and bounce. But when the storm hit, we found it was the coldest storm in the last 60 years. They actually studied it, and they figured it went to -90 with a wind chill.
And then he was on the radio a lot of the time calling for some backup assistance. But in those conditions, the radio really didn't work, the 2A radio. And so Don and I, because we lost some equipment. I had a pot, and Don and I took turns going around going around a bend to find a good spot to start digging for a snow cave, and which is what we started doing. And it's hard to dig in areas where the snow is really hard without proper gear, right? So with the gear that we had and the pot that I had and one of the ice axes, we started scraping and making a semblance of a snow cave. It's a very shallow one, and it was just enough for three of us to lie sort of side by side and to sort of spoon to stay warm. And we had one thermarest, like a foamy pad, and a couple of sleeping bags. At least one disappeared with the tent, and there's a lot of stuff that ended up disappearing, unfortunately, when the strong gusts came and just blew stuff all over. And so we ended up being in this very, very uncomfortable snow cave, which resembled more like a sardine can. If you have proper equipment, you can make snow caves that are very luxurious to the point where you can actually stand in them. But when you don't have all the gear that you need to do that, you just need to get out of the elements. But eventually we got a call out to Timmy, Tim Jones, who was on Grouse Mountain here, dealing with another search at the time. But eventually, through Tim, we managed to get the local search and rescue group from Alaska involved, because they're the closest to that area. Yeah.
Once I found out Tim Jones was involved, I knew my body'd get off the mountain. Before that, I thought we weren't even going to be found. We'd just be buried and lost. But he was kind of a tenacious man. So I knew if anybody could pull it off, it would have been him. And I was right, because he had the American military involved within 15 minutes of getting the Mayday call that we needed help. And if it wasn't for the American military in a high altitude helicopter at Talkeetna, Alaska, we'd still be on the mountain. Even our friends that got to us probably could have taken Don and Alex off, but they couldn't have taken me off because my hands were gone, so I couldn't help to self-rescue. I would have been just basically a pile of, mulch that they would have to get off the mountain. And it's hard enough getting yourself off the mountain at that elevation. To actually take somebody down would have been very, very difficult.
I think that storm was, it was like 3 days of really, really bad weather, and we were hunkered down for like 18 to 24 hours, something like that. Yeah. And it's sort of weird though, because I always had the feeling that I was going to get out of there, but you got to remember, at that point we also lost our stove, so we had no way of melting snow to make water in which to basically put electrolytes in, like a Gatorade powder and that, because you do lose like sodium, potassium, all that stuff. So you're not going to last very long if you don't drink fluids. And I was so dehydrated, I didn't urinate for like 2 days, which is a lot, because you want to be really careful, because once your kidneys shut down, it's very hard to kickstart them. So we got lucky that way. Yeah, the weather cleared up, and then we heard a plane. When the weather started to clear up, there was actually 2 other people in our group that managed to get to us, and as the weather was getting better, and then they of course they had a stove and mixed up electrolyte drinks for us, and drank a lot of fluids, yeah. You're not hungry at that point, you just need to take fluids.
It took 2.5 more days for help to come, and it shows the quality of the characters of the men I was with, because there was no arguing, there was no why'd you do this, why'd you do that. It was very calm. You know, we have to survive, this what has to be done, who can do what, and then basically take care of each other as best we could. And I think there's very, very few people that would have survived that, and I think it is because they were so calm and so well trained and so giving.
Later that night, a high altitude chopper came in, and one by one we went in, and so got flown out to a staging area lower down. There was like a warming hut. It was on the side of a lateral moraine. There's a lot of light in the sky still, right? At that time of the year in the spring, and it's never truly dark. And so it's beautiful and very, very calm. The storm had totally stopped, and it was surreal. We're very lucky though, yeah, very lucky.
When I froze my hands off, it looks like cat paws, so my nickname's Paws now. So I like the look of the paw, so I got the paw tattooed on my hand, and then I kind of expanded. Now I got the grizzly going up my arm too. Well, it's funny because I've been the rescuer. This was my first time being the rescuee, and I gotta admit, I much prefer being the rescuer. It was terrifying. Through the help of other heroes, I was able to live, which none of us thought we would. I ended up with some minor injuries, like I lost my fingertips, but it's not really, it's worse than it looks worse than it really is. It was, again, amazing people, because North Shore Rescue really surrounded me, really took care of me, really made sure I was all right.